Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf returned to Tehran after a marathon round of negotiations in Islamabad and delivered a message meant for both domestic audiences and Washington. The Islamic Republic believes it has withstood nearly half a century of pressure, and it intends to keep doing so. Speaking after coming back from Pakistan, where Iran and the United States held high-level talks that ran through the night and ultimately broke up without a deal, Ghalibaf thanked Iran's negotiating team and the reporters who covered the meetings. Their work, he argued, helped blunt what he called the other side's attempts to shape public perception and weaken Iran's position through media pressure. His tone quickly hardened as he addressed recent remarks from U.S. President Donald Trump. Ghalibaf insisted that threats do not change Iran's calculations and that the language of intimidation only deepens mistrust. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, he said, the country has lived under varying forms of military, political, and economic pressure, yet has not yielded. The same approach would continue now, even as the region moves through one of its most volatile moments in years. Then he spoke directly to the U.S. leadership, framing Iran's policy as a simple, symmetrical response. Asterisk, he said, if you go to war, we will fight you, and if you come forward with logic, we will treat you logically. We will not bow to any threat as a deterrent. He said, test our resolve once again so that we will teach a greater lesson. Ghalibaf also argued that Washington cannot expect progress without first repairing trust. He said the United States owes a debt to the Iranian people for its past actions, and that any serious attempt to move forward would require steps that demonstrate reliability rather than coercion. He pointed to what he described as strong domestic backing at home, saying nationwide rally. In support of the Islamic Republic strengthened Iran's hand during the Islamabad talks. In his view, public displays of unity signaled that Iran's negotiators were not isolated or vulnerable, and that the country's internal cohesion would not crack under outside pressure. The talks he described were not routine diplomacy. They came after weeks of conflict and only days after a temporary ceasefire was put in place to create space for negotiations. Iran says it entered the Islamabad meetings after receiving indications from Washington that key Iranian conditions could be discussed under what was described as a 10-point framework. The negotiations began on Saturday and stretched across roughly 21 hours. The U.S. delegation was led by Vice President JD Vance. Iran says the sessions were intense, serious, and difficult. Ghalibaf claimed Iran presented multiple initiatives as goodwill gestures, proposals meant to show that Tehran was not arriving merely to stall or posture, but to explore possible off-ramps. Yet the talks ended early Sunday without an agreement. Iranian officials accused the U.S. side of introducing demands that Tehran viewed as excessive and politically impossible to accept. They argued that the American approach appeared less focused on stabilizing a fragile ceasefire and more centered on extracting long-term commitments under pressure, commitments that Iran believes would amount to surrendering core sovereignty. The breakdown set off immediate recriminations. From Washington, Vice President Vance offered a blunt assessment as he prepared to depart Pakistan. He said the negotiating team had been in constant communication with President Trump and the wider national security apparatus throughout the talks, calling the effort good faith diplomacy, even as he acknowledged the deadlock. Vance described the American proposal as final, essentially a take-it-or-leave-it offer, and suggested that Tehran had chosen to walk away from terms Washington consider. At essential, he said the bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. He added that the United States had made clear what it could accommodate and what it would not. At the heart of the dispute, according to Vance, was the question of Iran's nuclear intentions. The U.S. position, he said, demanded a durable commitment that Iran would not seek a nuclear weapon or the tools that could allow a rapid path to one. That, he argued, was the core objective of Trump's administration and the point the American side believed it could not compromise on. Iran's response was to frame the U.S. stance as coercive and unrealistic, and soon a new allegation emerged, one that suggested the talks were not just difficult but possibly derailed midstream. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi alleged that an unscheduled phone call during the negotiations shifted the tone and direction of the talks. According to his account, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Vice President Vance while the meeting was underway, and that call changed the focus of the discussions. Araghchi said Iran was disappointed by how the U.S. conducted itself in the room. He claimed that after the call, the atmosphere moved away from the bilateral U.S.-Iran track and toward Israel's strategic interests. The allegation struck a nerve because it touches the most sensitive fault line in this conflict the extent to which Israel's security priorities shape Washington's negotiating posture, even when the immediate subject is a ceasefire and a pathway back from the brink of wider war. Araghchi went further, accusing Washington of trying to obtain at the table what it could not obtain through force. He insisted Iran arrived in Islamabad in good faith, but left with deeper doubts about whether the U.S. was prepared to negotiate on terms Tehran considers respectful and reciprocal. He also criticized the optics of Vance speaking publicly before leaving Pakistan, arguing that press conferences and public messaging at such a delicate stage can harden positions and embarrass counterparts, making compromise harder. In Tehran's telling, the talks were already difficult. Public declarations of final offers and claims of Iranian refusal only made the gap feel wider. Vance, for his part, told reporters that the U.S. team had been speaking to the president repeatedly during the negotiations and coordinating with senior officials. He said, "We were constantly in communication with the team because we were negotiating in good faith, and we leave here with a very simple proposal. That is our final and best offer." She did not publicly address the reported call with Netanyahu, even as Iran's allegation gained traction as the narratives collided. Tehran emphasized that the atmosphere in Islamabad was never one of trust. Iranian officials stressed the talks was air-held after weeks of war and just days after a ceasefire in a climate shaped by suspicion, trauma, and mutual accusation. In Iran's view, no one should have expected a sweeping agreement in a single session, given the weight of the issues and the intensity of recent events. Iran also presented its participation as proof that diplomacy remains an instrument of national interest, even in wartime. Iranian messaging suggested its negotiators were doing their duty by exploring any avenue that could safeguard sovereignty, reduce threats, and relieve pressure without capitulating. Still, the collapse of the talks triggered a fresh war of words. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Iran's former foreign minister, jumped into the dispute online, bluntly arguing that the negotiations failed because the U.S. insisted on terms Iran would never accept. He mocked Washington's framing that Iran refused to compromise, suggesting the outcome was obvious from the start if the U.S. approach was built around imposed conditions rather than mutual commitments. The exchange captured a familiar pattern that has haunted U.S.-Iran diplomacy for decades. Washington argues it needs verifiable guarantees. Tehran argues it cannot accept demands it views as domination. Each side frames itself as pragmatic and the other as unreasonable. Each claims it was the one negotiating in good faith, and each speaks not only to the other party, but to allies, rivals, and domestic audiences watching closely. Ghalibaf tried to place the breakdown into a longer historical arc. He depicted Iran as a country shaped by resistance, hardened by sanctions and conflict, and trained to see threats as a constant. From that standpoint, he argued, Iran's strategy is to rely on its own capabilities and national resilience rather than gamble its security on promises from a rival it does not trust. He also suggested the United States must accept that intimidation will not produce compliance. In his telling, only a credible effort to rebuild trust could open a path forward, and even then, it would be slow and difficult. He framed any future progress as conditional on Washington changing its posture, moving from threats toward what he called logic. Meanwhile, the unanswered questions from Islamabad remain heavy and immediate. If the talks could not produce a deal, even under a ceasefire window, what happens when that window closes? Can the truce hold without a political framework behind it, or does it simply delay a return to open conflict? Will the parties return to the table, or will the accusations, especially the claim that outside influence redirected the negotiations, make another round even harder? There is also the question of whether the collapse was caused by a single interruption or by structural reality. One phone call, even a consequential one, cannot on its own erase the deep differences over nuclear assurances, regional security, sanctions relief, and the question of who sets the terms. The deeper issue may be that both sides arrived with red lines that overlap too little. Washington seeking long-term commitments and verification, Tehran seeking recognition of sovereignty, an end to coercion and guarantees that any agreement will not be reversed or undermined. Still, in the immediate aftermath, Iran's leadership is sending a clear message. Tehran wants negotiations on terms it considers balanced, but it is preparing its public for the likelihood that diplomacy will not deliver quick relief. It is also warning that any renewed confrontation will be met with force. And the United States is sending its own message. It believes it offered its final and best terms, that Iran refused them, and that the responsibility for failure lies in Tehran's unwillingness to provide the assurances Washington demands. In that space, between pressure and sovereignty, between final offers and refusal to bow, the region now faces a perilous question. Was Islamabad a near breakthrough disrupted by mistrust and competing agendas, or was it always destined to collapse because neither side is ready to make the kind of concessions that would turn a ceasefire into a durable settlement? For now, the only certainty is that the distrust on display in Pakistan has not faded. It has intensified publicly, sharply, and with language that leaves little room for easy repair. And as both sides return home and harden their narratives, the path back to the table may be longer than the 21 hours they spent in the room.